Under the cerulean expanse of Nyxara's sky, chaos erupted. The once serene mining colony, a mesh of gleaming domes and spiraled towers, now trembled under a sudden, brutal assault. Captain Eli Voss, in charge of the colony's security, stood on the precipice of the command center's observation deck, watching as alien ships descended like raptors from the heavens. Their approach was silent but visually stark, bright against the dark void of space, their hulls painted with symbols that glowed ominously red. The sight was enough to send a shiver down the spine of any seasoned officer. Eli, with his sharply cut jaw and eyes hardened from years in the frontier sectors, was no exception. He knew the enemy's reputation: merciless, swift, and devastatingly efficient. Captain Voss, a young lieutenant, his voice cracking under the weight of urgency, handed him a tablet displaying the rapid approach of the enemy. "They've bypassed our orbital defenses. Impact in less than 3 minutes." Eli's response was a nod, measured but quick. "Alert all units. Initiate evacuation protocol Sigma. Get those civilians to the bunkers." His commands were crisp, cutting through the rising murmur of the control room like a knife. As personnel scrambled to respond, Eli's gaze returned to the viewport. The alien ships began their bombardment, blue pulses of energy arcing through the sky and striking the colony's protective barriers. The shields flickered under the onslaught, a symphony of light that painted fear across the faces of his crew. "Sir, should we engage the enemy directly?" the lieutenant asked, his figure tense with the anticipation of combat. "No," Eli replied, his strategy forming even as the barrier gave another alarming flicker. "We hold them at the barriers. Prepare to activate the ground turrets. And get me a direct line to Admiral Hawk. If we're going to survive this, I need those reinforcements." The lieutenant nodded, his movements swift as he relayed the orders. Around them, the command center buzzed with the energy of a hive disturbed, every officer and technician driven by a surge of adrenaline and fear. Yet, amidst the organized chaos, Eli stood still, a solitary figure of resolve. He understood the gravity of the situation. The enemy was not just attacking a colony, they were challenging the might of humanity itself. His next decisions would dictate not only the fate of Nyxara, but potentially the entire human presence in this sector. As the first structures crumbled outside from direct strikes, breaking the horizon's line with bursts of fire and debris, Eli's voice echoed once more across the command center. "This is our ground, and we will stand firm. Prepare to defend the colony." His words bolstered the spirit of his crew, a necessary spark of courage in the darkening shadow of war. Now, more than ever, they needed to be resolute, for the battle had only just begun. As the initial blasts rattled the colony's barriers, Captain Eli Voss's commands resonated through the chaos, igniting a swift mobilization among the troops. The ground shook under the impact of the enemy's relentless assault, the vibrations traveling up through the soles of their boots, a constant reminder of the looming threat. Outside, the sky crackled with the clash of energy against the shield, each strike illuminating the night with a brilliant but dangerous light show. The air tasted of ionized particles, a sharp tang that stung the tongue and tightened the chest. Soldiers, their faces set in grim determination, manned their stations, feeding rounds into the auto turrets that lined the colony's perimeter. "Fire at will!" Eli's order cut through the din, a clear, potent command that set the turrets ablaze with retaliatory fury. The roar of gunfire melded with the crackle of energy weapons, creating a symphony of defiance against the invaders. Inside the command center, the lieutenant updated Eli with a rapid-fire delivery. "Reinforcements from Terra Station are en route. ETA 20 minutes. Admiral Hawk confirms full support." Eli nodded, his focus never wavering from the live feed displaying the battle's progress. On screen, lines of blue and red danced a deadly ballet, marking the exchange of fire between ground forces and the alien crafts. The stench of burning electronics and overheated metal permeated the command center, seeping in from the damaged outer sections of the facility. He turned to address a group of engineers working feverishly to reroute power to the failing shields. "Keep those barriers up. We can't afford a breach," he instructed, his voice a steady beacon amidst the storm of activity. A young ensign approached, his expression taut with concern. Sir, medical teams report the infirmary is at capacity. Casualties are mounting, and they're requesting more supplies. Divert non-essential power to medical. Set up auxiliary triage centers in the bunkers. Eli responded without hesitation, his decisive actions fostering a fragile thread of hope among his crew. The ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time as a nearby building succumbed to the bombardment, its collapse sending a cloud of dust and debris swirling through the air. The gritty particles scratched at the throat and blurred vision, adding a visceral layer to the already palpable tension. In the lull that followed the latest barrage, Eli's ears rang with the echo of explosions, a stark reminder of the battle raging just beyond their walls. He wiped sweat from his brow, the saltiness mingling with the dust clinging to his skin. "Captain, look!" The lieutenant pointed to a section of the display where the red lines began to falter. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Press the advantage. Target their flank where they're weakest. Let's show them what it means to challenge humanity, Eli declared, rallying his troops with a vigor that breathed life into their weary bones. As the next wave of orders went out, Eli allowed himself a moment to glance at the stars above, obscured now by the smoke and chaos, but still a reminder of what they were fighting for. This battle was not just for Nexara. It was for all of humanity, a stand against the darkness threatening to engulf them. As Captain Eli Voss orchestrated the retreat to the canyons, the stark reality of war bore down on them, the air filled with the staccato of laser fire and the roar of explosions. The tactile feedback of the ground trembling underfoot melded with the acrid bite of smoke drifting over the battlefield, signaling the encroaching enemy. With a strategist's eye, Eli watched the enemy advance, their movements as relentless as the tide, washing over the abandoned outposts with cold precision. He gripped the rail of the command center's viewing deck, his knuckles pale under the strain. The sharp scent of ozone from the nearby electric defenses lingered in the air, a harsh reminder of the battle's ferocity. "We've led them right where we want them," Eli murmured to his communications officer, a wiry man whose steady hands flew over the console, coordinating the complex ballet of war. "Signal all units. Execute Phase 2 of the Delta Protocol. Encircle and engage." The officer nodded, his voice a calm beacon as he relayed the commands. "Units Gamma and Epsilon, flank left. Delta unit, hold the center. Encirclement at 60%. Close the gap." The canyon, a natural fortress of jagged rocks and narrow passages, became a crucible. From the high vantage points, Eli's snipers took aim, their rifles silent heralds of death as they picked off targets with chilling efficiency. Below, the ground forces, their armor smeared with dust and sweat, stood ready to engage the enemy at close quarters. Eli's heart pounded with a drummer's rhythm, each beat echoing the fears and hopes of his people. The sensory overload was palpable, the metallic tang of blood mixed with the dry, dusty air, and the sound of boots grinding gravel into the earth as soldiers maneuvered for position. Amidst the chaos, a moment of stark clarity came when Eli locked eyes with a young sergeant, his face smeared with grime and blood, yet his gaze was resolute. It was a silent exchange, a mutual acknowledgement of the weight they all carried, the burden of command that Eli felt more acutely at that moment. The trap was sprung with a symphony of gunfire and tactical maneuvers. "Now, push them back!" Eli's voice cracked like a whip, energizing his troops. The response was immediate and fierce, a wave of human defiance crashing against the alien onslaught. The clash of metal, the shouts of men, and the blasts of energy weapons created a cacophony that filled the canyon, a testament to human resilience etched in the echoes of the stone walls. Eli watched as the enemy faltered, their advance stalling under the relentless human counterattack. In the lull that followed, the soft whispers of the wind through the canyon seemed to carry the voices of those lost, a mournful choir that reminded all of the cost of this war. Eli felt the weight of every decision, every order that had brought them to this point. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the dim light seemed to offer a semblance of peace, a temporary reprieve from the chaos. Eli knew this was but a momentary pause. The calm before the storm of war surged again. Yet, in this fleeting dusk, There was hope, a hope that dawn would bring victory. As dusk embraced the canyon, the once roaring battlefield quieted, leaving only the distant echoes of the day's violence to serenade the soldiers. Captain Eli Voss surveyed the aftermath from a high vantage point, his silhouette outlined against the fading light. The ground beneath him bore the scars of battle, crushed rock and burnt earth, tangible reminders of their desperate stand. The chill of the evening air carried the mixed scents of pine from the surrounding forests and the iron tang of spilled blood, a stark contrast that underscored the surreal peace of the moment. Eli's ears rang with the residual noise of the day's chaos, yet a deeper silence was setting in, one that spoke of cautious anticipation rather than tranquility. "Sir, the enemy has retreated beyond the ridge, but their campfires suggest they're regrouping, not withdrawing," reported a young scout, his voice low, almost blending with the rustle of the leaves in the gentle night breeze. Eli turned, his eyes piercing the twilight as he processed this news. "Keep surveillance tight. I want updates every hour," he responded, the gravity of his command clear in his firm tone. As he made his way down to the command tent, the subtle crunch of his boots on gravel seemed amplified in the hush that had fallen over the camp. Inside, the glow of tactical displays illuminated intent faces, each officer and analyst marked by the fatigue of prolonged alertness. "We need to understand their motives. Why here? Why now?" Eli mused aloud, his gaze fixed on a blinking cursor on the screen, each pulse a silent drumbeat of urgency. The communications officer adjusted his headset, tuning into the frequency bands in search of any hint of the enemy's intentions. Suddenly the static cleared, and a fragment of a conversation in a guttural, unfamiliar language broke through. The room stilled, every ear straining to catch the elusive sounds. "We've captured it, sir. I'll try to clean it up for clearer analysis," the officer promised, his fingers deftly working the controls. Eli nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. What were they planning? The mystery only deepened, the unknown stacking up like the dark clouds that now threatened to obscure the stars. Outside, the camp was a low thrum of activity as soldiers prepared for the possibility of a night assault. The sharp scent of coffee mingled with the earthy aroma of damp foliage as men and women fortified their spirits with the bitter brew, their quiet conversations a murmur in the darkness. The sudden blare of an alarm sliced through the night, jarring the temporary calm. "Contact! Multiple bogies inbound from the northwest," shouted the radar operator, her voice a beacon of alarm. Eli's reaction was immediate, his body tensed for action as he strode out of the tent. "To your positions! This might be the real test of our defenses," he called out, his voice carrying across the camp, rallying his troops. As they scrambled to their stations, the first drops of rain began to fall, the cool moisture mingling with the sweat and dust on their skin. Lightning flashed, casting stark shadows that danced wildly around them, mirroring the sudden surge of adrenaline. The mystery of the enemy's silence loomed large in Eli's mind, each unanswered question a thread in a larger unseen tapestry. As the storm broke overhead, it seemed to herald a new phase of the conflict, one that promised revelations and, undoubtedly, new challenges. The storm unleashed its fury as Captain Eli Voss and his troops manned their stations, the rain pelting down like shards of glass in the relentless wind. Thunder rumbled overhead, a natural drum roll preceding the renewed assault from the enemy. Lightning illuminated the landscape in stark flashes, revealing the advancing silhouettes of alien war machines against the horizon. In the command tent, the tension was palpable. Screens flickered intermittently under the storm's influence, casting a ghostly light on the faces of the operators. Eli's gaze was fixed on the largest display, where the blips of incoming forces multiplied ominously. "Artillery units, stand by," Eli commanded, his voice cutting through the murmur of hurried preparations. His calm was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, where the howl of the wind mingled with the roar of energy cannons warming up. The sharp scent of wet earth and ozone filled the air, mixing with the smoky residue of previous skirmishes. The ground underfoot had turned to mud, sucking at boots as soldiers scrambled to reinforce their positions, the slick surface a treacherous adversary in itself. Suddenly, the enemy's tactics became clear as their first salvo of energy projectiles sliced through the night, turning the dark into day with blinding brilliance. The proximity of the explosion sent vibrations through the ground, felt deep in the bones of every soldier. "We've got breaches in sectors 4 and 7, shouted a lieutenant, her voice strained over the din. "They're testing our response times." "Patch the lines. Redirect mobile squads to those sectors," Eli responded instantly, his directives sharp and decisive. He then turned to a runner, a young soldier whose uniform hung heavy with rainwater. "Get to the medical unit. Have them prepare for incoming casualties." As the runner dashed off, the tangy smell of rain mixed with the acrid burn of laser fire created a visceral atmosphere, the elements themselves seeming to conspire with the enemy. Eli returned his attention to the battlefield where his troops were now fully engaged, the staccato of their return fire punctuating the storm's cacophony. In the relative shelter of the command center, the communications officer worked feverishly to maintain lines open, her features focused intensely on her task. "Sir, we have an encrypted signal from the enemy. It's repetitive, seems coded," she reported, her voice a thread of urgency in the looming crisis. "Keep it on loop, analyze the intervals. There might be a pattern we can exploit," Eli instructed, his mind racing through the possibilities. Could this be the key to understanding their strategy? Outside, the flashes of gunfire and the whirling wind created an eerie ballet of light and shadow across the muddy battleground, the figures of soldiers and aliens alike appearing almost spectral in the tumult. Eli stepped out from the tent, bracing against the storm, to get a closer look at the front lines. His presence bolstered the spirits of his men, a solid, unyielding figure against the tempest. As he surveyed the field, the rain streaming down his face mingled with the sweat of exertion, each drop a cold reminder of the stakes they were fighting for. In that moment, the mystery of the enemy's signal loomed over him, a puzzle amidst the chaos, promising either a breakthrough or a trap. With each thunderclap, he felt the urgency of the hour, knowing that the resolution of this enigma could shift the war's tide irrevocably. As Captain Eli Voss returned to the command tent, his boots muddied and soaked, he was met by the communications officer. Her face was lit by the pale glow of her monitor, eyes wide with a breakthrough. "Captain, we've decoded the signal. Each burst corresponds to their artillery fire timing." Eli leaned over her shoulder, observing the patterns displayed on the screen, the rhythm of the enemy's tactics now laid bare. The intermittent light from the monitors flickered across his determined features. "Can we disrupt it?" "With the right frequency jammer, yes," she replied, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, setting up the parameters for a counter-signal. Outside, the rain had eased into a drizzle, the scent of fresh earth rising, mingling with the sharp metallic residue of discharged energy weapons. The sounds of the battlefield had shifted as well. The relentless barrage of artillery was now interspersed with the precise, retaliatory strikes of Eli's snipers. Eli stepped outside the tent to assess the effectiveness of their new strategy. The once chaotic orchestra of battle sounds had transformed into a calculated exchange of power. The ground, littered with the remnants of the day's fighting, squelched underfoot as he moved to a better vantage point. "Sir, the jamming is in place," reported the communications officer through his earpiece, her voice a steady presence in the midst of uncertainty. The sky, a tapestry of dark clouds breaking apart, allowed the occasional star to peek through, casting a silver light over the muddy terrain. In the newfound silence following the jamming, the abrupt cessation of enemy fire was surreal, almost dreamlike. Eli's troops, visible in their muddy and worn gear, used this reprieve to fortify their positions, dragging debris to create makeshift barriers. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing whine cut through the night, originating from the enemy lines. It was a new weapon, or perhaps a new tactic, Eli thought, the sound slicing through the temporary calm like a blade. His heart quickened, sensing the escalation in the enemy's methods. "Report!" Eli's command echoed back to the communications tent. "They're switching tactics, sir. Looks like they're trying to override the jammer," the officer's voice crackled over the radio, tense but controlled. Eli's gaze swept over his troops, their faces etched with both exhaustion and resolve. He raised his voice, carrying over the sounds of preparation. "Hold steady! This is what we trained for." As he made his way back to the command center, the ground vibrated anew, not from explosions, but from the heavy, rhythmic marching of enemy reinforcements. The air was thick with anticipation, and the slight chill that hung in the aftermath of the rain made every breath visible in the night air. Re-entering the tent, Eli was met with maps dotted with red and blue pins, the layout of the land a complex web of potential and peril. "Prepare all units for a possible ground assault," he instructed, his mind racing through scenarios, each decision a weight upon his shoulders. The mystery of the enemy's new weapon loomed large, a shadow against the strategic light they had just kindled. Eli knew that understanding this new development was key to their survival. As the night deepened, so did the stakes, each moment drawing them closer to the dawn that would either bring victory or defeat. As the night deepened, the enemy's new tactic materialized more clearly under the occasional flash of retreating storm clouds. From his vantage in the command tent, Captain Eli Voss observed the unusual pulsing glow of their artillery, a stark contrast to the stuttering flashes that had marked their earlier barrages. The air hung heavy with a damp chill, remnants of the rain mingling with a sharp electric tang from the freshly churned mud. Soldiers around him moved silently, efficiently, their senses heightened by the sudden shift in the enemy's approach. "Their firing pattern has changed," the artillery specialist noted, his voice low and taut with tension. "It's faster, more rhythmic. Seems like they're trying to overwhelm our jammers with sheer volume." Eli nodded, processing this information. His eyes never left the digital map, where red icons blinked in a steady, advancing rhythm. "Adjust our dampeners. Sync them to this new pattern. Let's turn their strategy against them." His command was met with immediate action. Operators adjusted dials and recalibrated equipment, their movements swift yet precise under the soft glow of their screens. The air inside the tent was thick with the smell of electronics and wet canvas, a testament to the night's unrelenting conditions. Outside, the sounds of the encampment preparing for another assault added a layer of urgency to the atmosphere. The clink of ammunition being loaded and the soft thud of boots on the earth created a cadence of readiness. Suddenly, a sharp cry cut through the night, a scout's warning. Eli stepped out of the tent just in time to see a flare illuminating a new wave of enemy troops advancing from the north, their figures outlined grotesquely against the bright light. "Positions!" His voice boomed across the camp, rallying his troops. As they scrambled into formation, the taste of adrenaline was sharp on their tongues, a bitter reminder of the fight's stakes. From the darkness beyond the flare's reach, the enemy's new weapon boomed, a deep, resonant blast that sent a shockwave rippling through the air, felt more than heard. It was a disorienting sensation, the ground vibrating subtly underfoot, shaking the resolve of the bravest soldiers. Back in the command tent, the communications officer managed to isolate a segment of intercepted transmissions, her face a mask of concentration. "Captain, I think they're coordinating strikes based on our jammers' disruptions. They're adapting quicker than we anticipated." Eli's jaw set firmly, his resolve hardening. "Prepare for close combat, and get me more intel on that weapon. I want to know how to stop it." As he issued orders, the scent of gunpowder became more pronounced, mingling with the earlier rain's earthy aftermath. Soldiers passed by him, their faces set in grim determination, each carrying the unspoken burden of imminent battle. Eli returned to the heart of the tent, his mind racing with strategies. The enigma of the enemy's capabilities hung over them like the storm clouds that had retreated only hours before. Each moment was crucial, the tension palpable in the cool night air as they braced for what was to come. This battle was far from over, and the mystery of the enemy's new weapon promised a dawn tinged with danger and uncertainty. As dawn broke, the horizon was stained with the smoky aftermath of the night's skirmishes. The early light cast long shadows across the camp, where Captain Eli Voss and his team were bracing for what they anticipated to be a pivotal day. The cool morning air was crisp, carrying the lingering scents of damp foliage and burned metal, a silent testimony to the intense battles fought hours before. Eli stood outside the command tent, surveying the fortifications that had been hastily improved under the cover of darkness. His soldiers, visible against the awakening light, were silhouettes of determination, their movements precise and silent, a dance of shadows preparing for the storm to come. "Captain, the enemy has halted their advance. They're holding position just beyond the ridge," reported a scout, his voice cutting through the morning stillness with an edge of uncertainty. The pause in combat was unnerving, as if the early morning mist held secrets yet to be revealed. Eli nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed this information. "Maintain visual contact. Use the drones to monitor their movements. I don't want any surprises," he commanded, his tone as steady as the gentle breeze that rustled through the leaves around them. Inside the command tent, the communications officer was tuned into the enemy's frequencies, her ears straining to decipher the static-filled whispers of the airwaves. Every so often, a fragment of a message would emerge, a puzzle piece in the larger mosaic of enemy strategy. Meanwhile, the aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the earthy smell of the morning, offering a brief respite for the weary soldiers. They gathered in small groups, sipping from their cups, their faces etched with fatigue and resolve, the warmth of the drink a small comfort against the chilling prospect of renewed conflict. Eli returned to the map spread out on the table, his finger tracing possible routes of enemy movement. "They're planning something. This silence is strategic," he mused aloud, more to himself than to anyone else. His deputy, standing nearby, nodded in agreement, his brow furrowed in thought. The quiet of the morning was suddenly broken by the sharp crackle of the radio. "Contact! Enemy drones spotted overhead!" came the urgent call from the lookout. Instantly, the camp stirred into action, the temporary calm shattered by the rapid response of the anti-air units. Eli stepped out just in time to see several drones spiraling down in flames, their destruction illuminating the sky with brief flashes of fire. "Shoot down every last one. Gather any debris that falls within our perimeter. It might give us more insight into their capabilities," he ordered, his voice carrying clearly over the clamor. As the debris rained down, small fires ignited where the smoldering pieces met the dry earth, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The smell of scorched electronics briefly overpowered the natural morning scents, a stark reminder of the technological war being waged. In the lull that followed, Eli stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the enemy lay hidden. The rising sun cast his shadow long and thin across the ground, a solitary figure set against the backdrop of a waking battlefield. The mystery of the enemy's intentions hung heavily in the air, each moment of calm before the storm pulsing with the silent promise of revelations yet to come. As the sun climbed higher, casting its searing light over the battlefield, the remnants of the downed drones were collected and brought to the makeshift tech analysis tent. Captain Eli Voss stood over the charred electronics, the sharp tang of burnt circuitry biting at his nostrils. His eyes, hidden behind a pair of tactical goggles, scrutinized every melted component, searching for any clue that might reveal the enemy's next move. "Looks like standard surveillance tech, but these modifications," a tech officer pointed out, gesturing to an unfamiliar module, its casing cracked but still faintly humming with residual energy. "I've never seen anything quite like it." Eli's curiosity piqued, and he leaned in closer, the acrid smell of the debris filling his senses. "Figure out what it does. Anything that gives us an edge," he instructed, his voice a low rumble amid the bustling tent. Outside, the day grew hotter, the sun merciless in a cloudless sky. The soldiers shielded their eyes, sweat mingling with the dust on their faces, creating streaks of mud across their skin. They moved with deliberate caution, setting up defensive positions, the air vibrating with the tension of the anticipated confrontation. Meanwhile, the sounds of sporadic gunfire resumed, distant but ever present, a reminder that the enemy was still out there, watching, waiting. The ground beneath their feet baked in the heat, the dry earth cracking, a mirror to the tension that gripped Eli and his team. Back in the command tent, a sudden burst of static from the radio made everyone turn. "Sir, we've intercepted a new transmission. It's different this time, more complex, encrypted," the communications officer reported, Her brow furrowed as she adjusted the knobs, trying to isolate the signal. "Keep at it," Eli responded, his mind racing with possibilities. What were they planning? The uncertainty was a gnawing presence, almost palpable in the air, thick with the scent of ozone left by the morning's downed drones. The day dragged on, each hour marked by small skirmishes and the relentless sun. The soldiers' morale was buoyed by a supply drop, the parachutes blooming like strange flowers against the blue sky. As they gathered the supplies, the scent of freshly baked bread from the rations mingled oddly with the metallic tang of ammunition. Comfort juxtaposed with conflict. In the late afternoon, a breakthrough came. "Captain, we've cracked part of the encryption. There's a set of coordinates and a timestamp," the tech officer announced. Her face lit up with a mixture of triumph and concern. Eli studied the coordinates, his mind mapping out the terrain. "This could be where they're commanding the assault, or it's a trap," he pondered aloud, the pieces of the puzzle slowly forming a coherent image. "Gather a strike team. We move at dusk." As preparations began, the camp buzzed with a new energy. Soldiers checked their gear, their faces set in grim determination, the clank of their weapons punctuating the quiet. Eli watched them, his heart heavy with the responsibility of command. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful veneer over the grim tableau below. Tonight, under the cover of darkness, they would face the enemy head-on, the mystery of the intercepted message either leading them to a decisive victory or into the jaws of a well-laid trap. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the last rays of daylight vanished, leaving the camp cloaked in twilight. The air turned cool, carrying a faint metallic tang from the equipment being prepped for the mission. Captain Eli Voss stood beside the assembled strike team, his voice low but firm as he briefed them under the dim glow of a tactical map. "The coordinates put us here," he said, tapping the translucent overlay. "High ground, limited cover. If they've entrenched, they'll see us coming. We move in tight formation, silent until we're in striking range." "Understood?" The soldiers nodded in unison, their faces shadowed but their determination evident in the sharpness of their movements. Each checked their gear one last time, the snap of rifle magazines locking in place, the rasp of combat knives sliding into sheaths, the faint clink of grenades secured to belts. Eli observed them with a practiced eye, noting every shift in posture, every glint of resolve. As they moved out, the terrain grew rougher. The once cracked earth became rocky, uneven, the jagged edges crunching softly beneath their boots. The night pressed close around them, the only sounds the occasional rustle of wind through sparse vegetation and the faint, distant call of nocturnal creatures. The faint warmth of the day still radiated from the stones, a ghost of the sun's intensity now overtaken by the chill creeping into the air. Eli signaled a halt, raising his fist to stop the group. He crouched low, his sharp eyes scanning the area. The faint glimmer of light danced ahead, flickering like distant fireflies. "We're close," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of their movements. The team adjusted their positions, spreading into a loose line, weapons at the ready. The air grew heavier, charged with the anticipation of what lay ahead. The faint glow ahead flickered again, larger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The scent of scorched vegetation reached them, a hint of the enemy's presence, subtle yet undeniable. Eli motioned for the scout to move forward. The soldier slinked ahead, his silhouette blending seamlessly into the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the team waited, muscles taut, breaths held. When the scout returned, his face was pale, his voice tight. "It's a staging ground," he whispered. "They've got artillery, vehicles, and something else. I couldn't get close enough, but it's alive." The cryptic report sent a ripple through the team, their tension shifting to unease. Eli's brow furrowed as he absorbed the news, his mind piecing together the implications. "We'll split into 2 units," he decided, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "One to sabotage their equipment, the other with me to investigate this something else. No mistakes." They moved in silence, every step deliberate, the chill of the night now biting at their exposed skin. As they approached the staging ground, the flickering light revealed the silhouettes of enemy troops and towering machinery, their forms monstrous in the dimness. And then, just beyond the equipment, something shifted. A massive, sinuous form illuminated for the briefest moment, its motion slow, deliberate, and utterly foreign. Eli's breath caught as he realized they were facing something far more dangerous than they had prepared for. This wasn't just a battle, it was a warning of what lay ahead. The air thickened with an unearthly tension as Captain Eli Voss signaled his team to halt. They crouched low, the jagged rocks providing scant cover as they surveyed the alien staging ground below. The faint, pulsing glow from the enemy's encampment cast shifting shadows over the scene, distorting shapes into something almost sinister. Eli's eyes narrowed, taking in the monstrous machines stationed like sentinels, their edges sharp and metallic, gleaming faintly in the dim light. A low vibration coursed through the ground beneath them, subtle yet persistent, emanating from the strange, sinuous form moving in the distance. It coiled and shifted like a predator in wait, its motion unnervingly fluid for something so large. Eli's senses sharpened, the faint tang of scorched earth mingling with the metallic bite of blood carried on the breeze. He turned to his second-in-command, Sergeant Miles, whose jaw was set, his breathing steady despite the palpable fear hanging in the air. "Keep your team focused on the equipment," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. "No distractions, that thing stays my priority. We need answers." Miles nodded, his eyes darting toward the alien presence before refocusing on his task. "Understood. We'll blow their supply lines and regroup at extraction. Good luck, sir." As Miles led his unit around the perimeter, Eli gestured for his smaller team to follow. They moved like shadows, weaving through the rocky outcrops, each step calculated to avoid the loose gravel that threatened to betray their position. The faint, acrid tang of alien fuel grew stronger as they neared the camp, its sharpness almost choking in the confined spaces between the rocks. Ahead, the creature's massive form loomed closer, its movements hypnotic yet menacing. Eli motioned for his team to halt, crouching lower as he observed its behavior. In the dim, flickering light, the creature's surface shimmered, its texture unlike anything he had seen, neither scaled nor smooth, but a strange hybrid that seemed to ripple and shift with the light, like liquid metal caught in motion. "Captain, what is that?" whispered Private Collins, his voice barely holding steady. The young soldier's wide eyes betrayed the fear that even Eli felt gnawing at the edges of his resolve. "I don't know," Eli murmured, his gaze never leaving the creature. "But we're about to find out." The sound of machinery grinding to life shattered the fragile quiet, drawing their attention back to the encampment. Enemy troops moved with mechanical precision, their uniforms stark and their helmets concealing their features entirely. They worked around the towering war machines, adjusting controls and loading what appeared to be ammunition glowing faintly with energy. It wasn't standard artillery. They were preparing for something larger, something catastrophic. "Those weapons aren't for defense," Eli muttered, the realization settling cold in his chest. "They're preparing for an offensive. We have to stop them now." A guttural, alien roar erupted from the creature, freezing the team in place. It shifted again, this time extending what looked like an appendage tipped with a jagged, glowing edge. The sound was primal, reverberating through their very bones. Eli's grip on his weapon tightened. Whatever this was, it was more than just another enemy. It was a force designed to terrify, to paralyze. "Stay low," Eli commanded, his voice as steady as he could muster. "We stick to the plan. We can't let fear stop us." As they moved closer, the glow from the enemy's weapons and the creature's shifting form lit the path ahead, casting distorted shadows against the jagged rocks. The air grew heavier, each breath carrying the weight of what was to come. Eli felt the pull of the unknown, a gnawing sense that they were stepping into a trap, but with no choice but to confront it head-on. The alien creature shifted again, its jagged form glinting under the glow of the enemy's encampment. Eli Voss crouched behind a cluster of rocks, motioning his team to stay down. Each movement of the creature seemed deliberate, as if it was waiting for something, an order, a signal, or perhaps its prey. Eli's mind worked furiously. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just for intimidation. It was a weapon, and it needed to be neutralized. Eli activated his comms, speaking in a low, deliberate voice. "Miles, what's your status?" A burst of static, then Miles's response came, calm but hurried. "Charges are set on the main vehicles and supply caches. Give us 5 minutes for a clean retreat." Eli glanced at his team. Time was running out, and the creature's presence complicated everything. "We don't have 5 minutes," he muttered, weighing his options. He scanned the staging ground again, noting the patterns of the enemy patrols. Their movements were predictable, overlapping in timed circuits that left a narrow window of vulnerability. It was risky, but if his team could time it right, they could infiltrate closer. He gestured to Private Collins and another soldier, Rourke. "You two flank left. Draw their attention with suppressive fire. Keep them focused on that side. Grant and I will move in closer, plant explosives on whatever powers that thing." Collins nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Understood, sir." Eli turned to the rest of the team. "Once we've planted the charges, fall back to the rendezvous point. No heroics. Our objective is disruption, not annihilation." As his team spread out, the sounds of their careful movements were muffled by the crunch of dry gravel underfoot. The air was dense, thick with the strange scent of heated machinery and alien soil. Collins and Rourke broke left, their boots pressing through sparse vegetation until they reached the ridge. A moment later, the sharp crack of gunfire split the night, drawing the attention of the enemy patrols. Eli seized the moment. "Go!" he whispered sharply, and he and Grant darted forward, keeping low. The patrols, distracted by Collins' barrage, veered toward the ridge, their shouts garbled but urgent. The creature stirred, emitting a low, guttural growl that resonated through the ground. Eli's teeth clenched as he felt the vibration ripple through his boots. He motioned to Grant, who pulled a small device from his pack, a compact charge rigged to disrupt power sources. They reached the base of the alien weapon, its surface smooth and cold under their gloved hands. The glow radiating from it was almost hypnotic, pulsing in slow waves that made it feel alive. "Plant it here," Eli directed, his voice a mere breath. Grant secured the charge, the adhesive snapping into place with a muted click. They had seconds before the patrols would regroup. "Move!" Eli ordered, pulling Grant back just as the creature's head turned toward them. Its glowing appendage extended, slicing through the air where they'd been moments before. The charge's timer blinked. 30 seconds. Eli's heart thundered as they sprinted for cover, the promise of destruction trailing in their wake. Eli and Grant dove behind a jagged outcrop just as the first explosion rocked the encampment. The shockwave rolled through the ground, displacing loose stones and sending a blast of hot, acrid air against their faces. Behind them, the creature let out a guttural roar, its form illuminated by the flames licking at the alien machinery. Eli risked a glance over his shoulder. The weapon's pulsing glow was flickering erratically, the charge disrupting its energy flow as planned. "Direct hit," Grant panted, his face glistening with sweat. "Not yet," Eli said, his tone grim. "We've only slowed it down." Through the chaos, Miles's voice crackled in Eli's comms. "Charges detonated. Their supplies are gone, but they're regrouping fast. What's your status?" Eli pressed his comlink as he signaled Grant to reposition. "The weapon's compromised, but it's not down. We're heading to the extraction point now." The creature's movements became erratic as the disruption took hold. Its glowing appendage lashed wildly, carving deep gouges into the rocky terrain. The enemy soldiers, disoriented by the explosions, scrambled to regain control of the situation. Shouts in their guttural language echoed through the night, and Eli noted how even their disciplined formations faltered under the sudden chaos. "Rourke, Collins, lay down fire to keep them scattered," Eli commanded, his tone urgent. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, pinning the enemy troops as Eli and Grant moved toward the rendezvous. The sharp scent of gunpowder mingled with the bitter tang of scorched vegetation, the aftermath of their assault painting the night in chaos. Every step was deliberate, their movements quick but controlled, the terrain a treacherous maze of loose rocks and debris. "Grant, we're cutting through the ravine," Eli said, pointing to a narrow path that curved away from the staging ground. The ravine's walls offered cover, but their jagged edges cast long, twisting shadows that seemed almost alive in the flickering firelight. The air here was cooler, the ground damp from a thin stream of water trickling through the stones. They hadn't gone far when the creature roared again, the sound reverberating through the canyon. Eli turned just in time to see it charging, its jagged appendages slicing through the rubble as it pursued them. "Run!" he barked, adrenaline spurring them forward. Collins's voice came through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Captain, it's locked onto your position. We can't hold it off from here." Eli's mind raced as he formulated a plan. "Rourke, use the charges you've got left. We'll lure it into the choke point ahead. When it's in position, blow the ravine." As they reached the narrowest part of the pass, Eli turned to Grant. "Keep going. Get to the others." He planted his feet, his weapon raised as the creature closed the distance. The ground beneath him trembled as it advanced, its glowing eyes fixed on its prey. The moment stretched, tension thick in the air as Eli waited. Then, just as the creature lunged, the charges detonated, the ravine collapsing in a cascade of rock and dust. The deafening roar of the avalanche drowned out all else, and Eli shielded his face from the flying debris, the ground shaking beneath him as the canyon sealed the beast's fate. The dust began to settle, filling the air with a gritty metallic taste as Captain Eli Voss stood in the rubble-strewn ravine. The collapsed rocks were jagged monuments to the chaos they had just unleashed. He steadied himself against the uneven ground, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. Behind him, Grant emerged from the shadows, coughing as he waved the dust away. The distant echoes of crumbling stone faded into silence, but the stillness felt ominous rather than victorious. "Did we get it?" Grant asked, his voice breaking the heavy quiet. Eli didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the debris pile where the creature had been swallowed. He listened, ears straining for the faintest sign of movement, his pulse pounding in time with the ache in his chest. Then, from deep within the rubble, came a low vibration, a soundless pressure that radiated outward, stirring the loose gravel at their feet. Eli's jaw clenched. "Not for long," Eli said grimly, his voice carrying a weight that made Grant's grip tighten on his rifle. Eli tapped his comlink. "Miles, status?" "Charges are spent, Captain. Supplies are destroyed, but the enemy's rallying," Miles replied, his voice edged with tension. "They're heading your way." Eli's eyes hardened as he surveyed the ravine. "Pull your team back to the fallback zone. This ends here." Grant's head snapped toward Eli, confusion and defiance flashing across his face. "Fallback? Sir, the creature?" Eli cut him off with a sharp glance. "This thing isn't following us out. We stop it now." From the debris, the creature's glowing form began to emerge, shards of broken rock sliding off its body like water. Its movements were slower, more deliberate, but no less menacing. The glow from its appendages pulsed with fury, casting a haunting light on the shattered landscape. Its roar pierced the air, reverberating like a primal battle cry. Eli turned to Grant, his voice low but commanding. "You're taking the rest of the team and pulling back to Miles. That's an order." Grant hesitated, his hand twitching toward his weapon. "Sir, I can't." "You can and you will," Eli said, his tone unyielding. "This thing isn't just another enemy. It's a warning. They sent it here because they think we'll break. Let them see what happens when they underestimate us." Grant stared at him, the weight of the moment hanging between them, before nodding reluctantly. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice tight with emotion. He retreated, casting one last glance over his shoulder as Eli turned to face the creature alone. The ground shook as the creature advanced, its jagged limbs slicing through the air with lethal precision. Eli stood his ground, his rifle steady, his voice a growl of defiance as he muttered to himself, "Congratulations! You just declared war on the wrong species." As the creature lunged, Eli opened fire, his bullets tearing through its shimmering body. It roared in pain, but Eli didn't flinch. This was humanity's line in the sand, and he was determined to hold it, no matter the cost. The creature surged forward, its massive form rippling with alien fury. Each step shook the fractured ground beneath it, the tremors crawling up Eli's legs as he stood his ground. The creature's glowing limbs sliced through the air with calculated malice, its roar a soundless force that seemed to reverberate inside his skull. The heat radiating from its core turned the cool night air oppressive, beads of sweat rolling down Eli's face as he steadied his rifle and fired. Each shot hit true, the round sparking against its shimmering surface. The creature recoiled, its glowing appendages flaring brighter in what Eli could only describe as rage. Still, it pressed on, relentless, driven by some unknowable purpose. Eli's jaw tightened as he reloaded, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite the pounding in his chest. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, his voice low and sharp. "You want a war? Let's finish it." The creature lunged, its limbs slicing through the space where Eli had been a moment before. He rolled to the side, the jagged rocks beneath him cutting into his gear. As he rose, he caught a glimpse of its form fully illuminated in the glow of the flames around them. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement, a grotesque monument to the arrogance of those who thought humanity would cower. Eli's earpiece crackled, Miles's voice cutting through. "Captain, reinforcements are inbound. ETA 3 minutes. "Not enough time," Eli replied, his tone unwavering. His eyes locked on the creature as it turned to face him again, its glowing appendages pulsing like a heartbeat. "You get the rest of the team clear. That's an order." "Sir," Miles began, but Eli cut him off. "Do it, Miles. They need to see us fight, not run." The creature charged again, and Eli sprinted toward the nearest rock formation, each step a calculated gamble on uneven ground. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning debris, mingled with the metallic tang of blood from his split lip. As he climbed, the creature struck, its limb carving into the rocks with an ear-splitting crack. The force sent shards flying, one slicing through Eli's shoulder. He winced but kept moving, adrenaline drowning out the pain. At the summit, he turned to face it one last time. His rifle was spent, so he reached for the final explosive charge strapped to his belt. The creature paused, its glowing eyes narrowing as if it recognized the defiance in his stance. Eli pressed the detonator, his voice steady as the charge's timer blinked to life. "You should have stayed in the shadows." The blast erupted, a brilliant flash of fire and force that consumed the creature and the surrounding rocks. The shockwave threw Eli backward, the heat singeing his skin even as darkness claimed him. When he awoke, the first thing he saw was the sky, a vast expanse of stars unmarred by the creature's glow. Miles's face appeared above him, battered but alive. "We held the line," Miles said, his voice thick with emotion. Eli managed a weak smile, his words rasping but firm. "They thought they could break us. Now they'll know. They just declared war on the wrong species."